So, how many of you work for public agencies? How many of you are concerned about being cited by OSHA? This is where it gets even more complex for you public agencies. Half the states, roughly, are governed by federal OSHA. The other half have opted, instead of to be covered by federal OSHA, they have their own, they call it a state plan program. Are you all familiar with this? If you don't know the difference, whether you're an OSHA federal plan state or an OSHA state plan state, you need to find that out very quickly, and here's why. If you're covered by federal OSHA, there's this little document called the Constitution that prohibits federal OSHA from citing a state employee, an employee of the state government. So federal OSHA, if you are in a state plan state, OSHA is not going to be coming out there and issuing you or your people a citation for not wearing the high visibility garment. They can't. However, if you're in a state that has opted to have its own plan, a state plan, and they have to have requirements substantially, minimal, at least as good as OSHA's, there you're likely to be able to be cited because it'll be your state plan inspectors, and they're not prohibited from giving you a citation. So it's a little convoluted, isn't it? But it's moving forward, and I guess the safest practices is to make sure your workers are dressed properly. Because the high visibility standard is here. It is a safe practice. Representing an employer association, it is very difficult for me to come out and say, I won't come out and say, yay OSHA, go cite my people. But as a safety advocate, since I've been working at ARTBA since 1998, and the first 107 standard came out right around, I think it's 1999 when the ANSI ISCA 107 first standard came out. We have strongly supported that because we realized we were looking at the data, the insurance data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and we realized that if the operator doesn't see the worker, it's likely he's going to get run over. And that high visibility apparel, while it doesn't prevent him from being run over, it at least makes him more visible and gives us one more piece to the puzzle to make things safe. How's this for a song and dance, killing time for, okay. All right. So to wrap up, we started out with Starfish. Now we're going to talk about the space shuttle program winding down. But as we think about our jobs, we think about this, and you may have seen this before as well. As we talk about transportation and what we do, truly the space shuttle was revolutionary, ahead of its time, and was one of, and probably still is today, one of the most advanced transportation technologies that was available. However, the engineers that designed the shuttle were severely limited in its design and would have done it a bit differently had it not been for some problems. And let's go look at that. What you're looking there is kind of as if you cut off the end of two railroad track, and you see the end of the two rails there. And we're talking about the gauge between the two tracks of a railroad. And if you look at this rough engineer design, we see that the gauge, the distance between the two tracks in a rail is 4 feet, 8.5 inches, or 1,438 millimeters. And so we ask ourselves, that's an unusual number. That's not standard. It's not set. Why is a train gauge set at 4 feet, 8.5 inches, and what does that have to do with the space shuttle? Well, here is the issue. The space shuttle generally was launched out of Cape Canaveral, Florida, but those big orange solid rocket fuel tanks were built at a facility in northern Utah called Thiokol. And so they had to get these solid fuel tanks from Utah through the mountains of Colorado and everywhere else down to Florida. And how are they going to be transported? Train, okay, yeah, you're getting it, yeah. That's why we're talking about rail. All right, so the size of rails, these rails are going through tunnels, okay? So the size of the rail, the U.S. railway system, limited the size of these tanks and was an impediment to how the engineers would have preferred to design them. So, we start to ask ourselves, how did we get to so we get back to the rail thing, and why were rails developed at 4 feet, 8.5 inches? And we say, well, that was the gauge of the streetcars, mostly in the northeastern United States. And when the rail cars were built, they used the same tools, the same gauges and things to build the rail cars that they had used for streetcars in the northeastern United States, where those were very common. And that was the rail gauge that was used there. So we ask, okay, why did they use 4 feet, 8.5 inches in the eastern United States to build railroads? Oh, well, that came from the rail cars, the cars in England and in Europe. Because when the immigrants came here from England, they had those tools, they had those gauges, they knew how to build those cars, those trolley cars, and they carried that technology forward to the United States. So we go, okay, in England, why did they build their rails at 4 feet, 8.5 inches? Well, because when they started building the trolley cars, they used their same templates and tools and training that they had used for the wagons that ran on the roads in Great Britain. And so that gauge got carried over from wagons and stagecoach gauges. So what's the next question? Why were the stagecoaches and the wagons built at 4 feet, 8.5 inches? Well, the roads in England were very terribly rutted. And if they built a gauge different than 4 feet, 8.5 inches, they were breaking axles because they weren't fitting in the ruts from the roads that were in England at that time and really throughout most of Europe. Okay. Why were the roads in England? Who built the roads mostly through England and Europe? Who designed those? The Romans, okay? And why did they build them at that gauge? There, if you weren't watching, you saw my picture earlier. Well, the chariots that the Romans drove were built at that gauge. We're getting back about 2,000 years now, aren't we? Plus 3,000 years. So, why did the Romans build their chariots with the wheels set at 4 feet, 8.5 inches? That has impacted 3,000 years later one of the most modern transportation programs in the world. 4 feet, 8.5 inches is about the size of 2 horses' back ends. So we can say that going back, one of the most sophisticated transportation systems in the world was limited because of the size of 2 horses' back ends. That is the kind of thing that gets perpetuated forward, and it's hard to break. So as we start thinking about how we are going to do our part to improve safety, we have to kind of sometimes break those ties with the past if possible, start thinking a little bit differently. Stop thinking just as an occupational safety and health specialist or just as a traffic safety specialist, and think about things in a different way than we have done in the past if we're truly going to make leaps forward in how we go about impacting safety. So again, it may be only one starfish on the beach, but if I'm doing it alone and I engage every one of you to start working together to help, or you engage me, and we engage friends, and we think about new technologies, new ideas, new ways to pick up more than one starfish at a time, that's how we make a difference. And that's how we really have this vision to have 0 fatalities on our roadways. No, it won't happen overnight, but a goal or a vision of anything less than that is unworthy of our consideration. And I thank you for listening to that little song and dance for 45 minutes.